Good evening. We're in Mark chapter 10. If you want to turn to Mark 10, ladies' class will start back again in January. But you're with us. We were in Mark when you left, so you hadn't missed all that much because we haven't moved that far. Actually, chapter 10, verse 32. Some very unique, and I guess not a good word, unique, but significant themes that run through the Gospel of Mark. And one of those is Jesus trying to teach his disciples about the nature of the kingdom. The nature of the kingdom is misunderstood by them in a really big way because they're really struggling with this difficulty between the physical world and the spiritual world. As a matter of fact, when Peter rebukes Jesus for saying he's going into Jerusalem to die, by the way, that's another one of the great themes of the Gospel of Mark. Of course, it's the theme of all the Gospels because the death, burial, and resurrection is something that Jesus is walking steadfastly to as he's going to be crucified. But he tries to remind them of the nature of the kingdom, that it's a kingdom that he's going to die for, not a kingdom that he's going to sit on the throne and they're going to then serve in different capacities, which is going to be a part of what we see here with James and John in verse 35 beginning about their misunderstanding the nature of the kingdom. Peter rebuked Jesus, and Jesus said, The problem that you're having is that you're unable to differentiate between the physical and the spiritual. You're thinking with a worldly mind, and you ought to be thinking with a spiritual mind. And he's trying to get across to them that the nature of the kingdom is a spiritual kingdom. So as we've worked our way through up to chapter 10, and we're in the middle of chapter 10, this is going to happen again. Because you have conflict, or you have this rich young man who came to Jesus, and the reason that he came to Jesus seems to be selfish. Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Seems that he felt pretty good about himself, that he had been pretty good at keeping the commandments, and that's the first response that Jesus gives him is to keep the commandments. Have you kept the commandments? He named them, and he says, I've kept those from my youth. So it seems that there was some confidence that he had about his abilities to be able to save him because of his ability to keep the law. So that contrast between the way that the disciples think, the earthly nature of their thinking, and then Jesus is trying to get across to them the spiritual nature of the kingdom. And so what happens in 10:32, Jesus is going to foretell his death again. I didn't count, but I think this is the fourth time. I know it's at least the third time, but it may be the fourth time that Jesus foretells his death. And so he says, we're going to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles, and they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. So there's Jesus foretelling his death again, and also connected to it is this death, burial, resurrection. The next thing that's going to happen is going to be this contrast in the thinking of the apostles, and it's specifically going to be because of the interaction between Jesus and James and John. So notice chapter 10, verse 36. Verses 32 through 34, Jesus describes what I'm going to do. Jesus says, this is what I'm going to do. Remember, I referred to the fact when Jesus said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to die. Peter rebuked him, said, you can't let that happen. And he was rebuked himself because Jesus was trying to teach them about the nature of the kingdom. Well, here you have James and John who come to Jesus, and the question in verse 35 is, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Now, that's always a loaded question. What if your kids came to you and said, you have to give us anything we want for Christmas? How are you going to answer that question? Well, of course not. But the way they approach Jesus is with that statement. Would you give us what we ask you for? Jesus' response is, what do you want me to do for you? Okay, now, understand that we're dealing with Jesus, the Son of God, who knows their hearts. He knows what's going on. He's very aware of these conversations that they have even when he's not around. On the way to the Last Supper, the disciples were having this conversation about who's going to be the greatest. And that's basically the context of chapter 10, 35 and following. What do you want me to do for you? Now, hang on to that statement right there. What do you want me to do for you? Because that's going to come up again later on in the next story when Jesus heals Bartimaeus. He's going to say the same thing. What is it that you want me to do for you? So we'll look at that again in just a minute. So what do you want me to do for you? And they said, grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. And Jesus said to them, you do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? Okay, let's stop there, because he says, what do you want me to do for you? And they say, we want a significant place in your reign. Isn't that what they say? We want a place of authority in your, what do you call it, in the king's court, okay? You're going to be the king, and we want significant places there. Grant us, and this is what they say, to sit one at your right hand and one at your left hand. Now, the people who sit at the right hand or left hand of the king have the most access to the king. That just makes sense, doesn't it? So if you imagine if this is the throne, and you've got a person sitting here and a person sitting here, they have the best access to the king. And they will very likely have authority, have some authority in some way, whether you got a vice king, like a vice president, a secretary of state, whatever it might be. So their request is, allow us to have a very significant and powerful role in your coming kingdom. Jesus' response is to lay down a fact about the nature of his kingdom. The fact of the nature of his kingdom is that it's a suffering kind of kingdom. Another one of those themes that Mark's been dealing with all the way through is that Jesus has got to suffer. That's one thing he's highlighted, right? Jesus is going to suffer. But he also has highlighted the fact all the way through the Gospel of Mark that if you're going to follow Jesus, you too are going to suffer. If you're going to follow me, you too have to suffer. But the disciples do not grasp that. As a matter of fact, it seems that they're thinking in an earthly kind of mode rather than spiritual. They think that this kingdom is going to be so fantastic and is going to overrule and overrun the Roman Empire that we're going to have a place of great authority where we will be able to wield a great power, influence in this kingdom. That's what they're asking for. So Jesus then says, you don't realize what you're asking. Because if you want significant places in this kingdom, it means you're going to suffer just like I suffer. If you're going to have a significant role in this kingdom, you don't understand what kind of kingdom it is. But if you want a role in this kingdom, if you want to be right and left, if you want to be beside the king, then you must be willing to follow me into death. to follow me into suffering. So here's what he says. You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or the baptism with the baptism, to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? Now, he's not talking about literal baptism, and he's not talking about drinking a literal cup. He's talking about following him into suffering. A cup of suffering, when Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane, please remove this cup from me, this cup of suffering, this event that's about to take place, if there's any way, please remove this cup. He's using it metaphorically. A baptism, this idea of being covered or being buried, or it being that thing which overwhelms you. How can you be a part of my kingdom unless you are willing to suffer like I'm about to suffer? Can you do that? And they answered, oh yeah, we're able. Okay, here's where my thinking went awry. Okay, you can bring me back to sanity here. Did they understand what he said? Did they? Wow, you okay? Did they understand? He says no. Did they know what Jesus was talking about? Did they understand that this kingdom is going to be one of suffering, and it was going to be a spiritual kingdom? It was not going to be a kingdom that he's going to get on the throne and he's going to have somebody on his right and left. Did they understand that? Or did they have any little grasp of what Jesus is talking about? I have a pretty good understanding of Ryan's answer to that. They didn't have an inkling of an idea what Jesus is talking about, did they? But Jesus speaks to them very plainly, though it's metaphor. Drink the cup. Are you willing to drink the cup? Can you drink that cup? Can you be baptized with the baptism I'm about to be baptized with? Can you stand this physical suffering, this emotional suffering? Can you stand that? Can you do that? Can you walk into it like I'm having to walk into it, knowing exactly what's coming? Are you able to do that? Oh, yeah, we can do that. I don't think Jesus believes they could. So that's why he continues. Here, say it again. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and that's what's amazing about. We give the apostles a really hard time, and right here we are already in chapter 10, and they're showing themselves to be. Let me choose my word carefully. Unable to comprehend. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't going to call them ignorant or stupid. Yeah, I wouldn't call them any names like that. So we give them a hard time. We'll fight, yes. Right. We will fight to the death if necessary, yes. But that's kind of the way I was thinking. They didn't have an inkling of an idea of what kind of kingdom Jesus was talking about. They really didn't have a good idea of what he was talking about, period, because their thinking is still, this is going to be a kingdom where Jesus is going to get on their throne. He's going to deliver us, and we're going to fight with swords. So if that means we follow you into battle, we'll do that. We'll follow you into battle. Mm-hmm. They were. There's this kind of point during the days after the crucifixion of Jesus where it seems that their faith plunges, and then after his appearances to them, after his interaction with them. Now it takes 40 days, because right before his ascension back into heaven is that final one where he reinstates Peter, and he has the fire by the sea, and he has fish and bread on that fire, and then it's not very long till he's going to take them outside the city of Jerusalem, and they're going to watch him ascend back into heaven. So the faith, it plunges, and then it slowly starts building back until I think when, by the time the Holy Spirit comes on, in Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost, I think their faith has gone sky high. I think they are at that point. Perfect, no, but a grasp of it, yeah, finally, they have some kind of spiritual thinking. Yes, they are. Yeah. It is obvious by the time you get to chapter 2 in Acts that they are not concerned about the consequences of what they're going to do. Peter and John are called before the Sanhedrin. You better stop this preaching in this name, or we're going to get you. They shook their old bony fingers at them and said, "Stop it!" And they said, "We can't. We can't help but speak about what we've seen and heard. We're going to do it. You can kill us if you want. You know, you can do whatever you want to us. We will do what we know we have to do." Yeah, exactly. Hmm. Right. Hmm. Hmm. No, it wasn't the power of the sword for sure. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. Verse 37. We want to be one at your left, one at your right, in your glory, your glorious um, abode, your glorious kingdom, however you want to put it. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I was saying we give them a really hard time, um, but I think they are demonstrating what most humans would do and how we would respond in that kind of situation. Right. Yeah, they are the story. And isn't it fascinating that you have a story like this about James and John? Um, James is going to be beheaded in Acts chapter 12. John is going to live out his life into old age and write the largest part of the New Testament other than Paul, because he writes the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and Revelation. So John is going to be this great influence in the church for way into the near 100, or at least around 100, and into his old age. And James dies for the faith. And so there they are. Right. When the soldiers and the chief priest and all of those come and arrest Jesus, they hang around then, and they're aware of what's going on because Jesus is protecting them. At that point, that's when Peter pulls a sword, and and but after that, once they take Jesus into Jerusalem, and you got Peter and John who are there, the rest of them have scattered, and then Peter's going to scatter pretty quickly. So John is in there with Jesus. He seems to hang with him pretty much the whole time. Peter he tried to follow, but he was weak. And so after the third time of him denying Jesus, he pretty much hid out too. Hmm. Yeah, there is obviously great confusion because of lack of understanding of the nature of the kingdom for sure. That's true. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. So when Jesus is arrested, their concept of the kingdom and what they thought was going to happen is totally destroyed. And Ryan's point is when we already have our mind set on the way things ought to be, we interpret truth the way that we already understand things. And so I think that's what the disciples are doing. So Mark shows us the truth about what discipleship really is. He's done that now for 2 chapters and then probably 2 other chapters. The whole idea of being glorified by suffering. And when you are a disciple, it means that you follow him into whatever is coming, whatever it means. It might mean suffering. It might mean, he's really talking about it meaning suffering. And they will take their place in glory by their suffering, Jesus says. How can you take your place in glory? By your suffering. So they said, yes, we're able. That's verse 39. Jesus continues, the cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John, and Jesus called them to him and said to them. Okay, so Jesus says the nature of the kingdom is to follow me and suffer. It's a suffering kind of kingdom. But for one of you to sit on my right hand and one on the left is not for me to grant, but it's already been decided. And what Jesus is going to teach now is that those who are going to be the greatest in the kingdom are going to be who? The servants. Yeah. If you want to be great, what you have to do then is serve. You have to be the least. You have to be that one who commits his life to following the king. And once you do that, then your place is going to be a place of greatness in the kingdom. Not the right hand or left hand, but it's going to be a place of greatness. So notice how he begins now to explain it, because the other 10 apostles are indignant. They are angry because they realize what James and John asked. Can't you hear the yang going on among the 10 toward James and John? So that's what it says. The 10 heard it. They began to be indignant at James and John. So Jesus needs to address this. So he does. Verse 42. He called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. Notice verse 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus deals with this struggle that the 10 are having and the struggle that James and John are having, and he says those who think with an earthly mind, those who are the earthly leaders, use their power and authority and wield it against their subjects and become overlords, become lord over them, they use them, they abuse them in a very simple manner. And Jesus said, that is not to be the way, and that's not to be the nature of the kingdom of God. So that's what he says. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Flip back to verse 31 in chapter 10. Same kind of situation. You've got Jesus says, it's difficult for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, as difficult as a camel to go through the eye of a needle. who then can be saved. And so Jesus then goes into this treatment about who can enter the kingdom of heaven. You have, if you've left house, brother, sister, mother, father, children, lands for my sake, you'll receive all of that back hundredfold. And then he concludes that in verse 31. Note, but many who are first will be last, and the last first. So this is not a new concept. He's talked about, it's been a theme all the way through the Gospel of Mark, and Mark's laying it out there very plainly as he records the words of Jesus, laying it out there very plainly. If you're going to be a part of the kingdom, then that means you've got to be servant. And that's the same thing he says here in chapter 10, verse 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, quite interesting, I think this is the first time that Mark records this word of Jesus as Jesus describes this idea of ransom, the idea of a price for a release of a prisoner. So if you are a prisoner and you go to the one that's in charge, I guess that would be the jailer if we're looking from the book of Acts. You go to the jailer and you say, what would it cost to get this prisoner out? And he might give you a price. They may have to go to somebody higher up, but just say they gave you a price. Usually it's going to be a very big price. It's going to be something that's going to cost you dearly. So when Jesus uses this word about his giving, and he says he gives his life as a ransom, he is laying down his life to pay the debt to get you out of prison to sin. You could just say out of debt, if you want to just put it that way. But that whole idea is that a ransom is, it's the word that Jesus uses here that kind of advances a little further the act that's going to take place when he dies on the cross. He is going to be paying a sin debt when he dies on the cross, which is quite dramatic. Yes. Slave, yes. Mm-hmm. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, great point. The price of a slave, the ransom price for a slave, same idea. Okay, any other observations before we get into the healing of Bartimaeus? Exactly, yeah. Yeah, the great difficulty with Israel's place in the world is a misinterpretation of the whole Old Testament prophecies concerning Jesus and a denial of the New Testament, which is Jesus came, Jesus set up his kingdom, died on the cross, was resurrected, went back to heaven, now reigns at the right hand of the Father, reigns where he said he would reign for all of eternity. So, yeah, great point, Randy. All right, let's look at the healing of Bartimaeus, which begins in verse 46. You remember what James and John asked? Okay, keep that in mind. Remember Jesus' answer. So, verse 46, they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up. He's calling you." And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, note this, "What do you want me to do for you?" Same thing that he asked James and John. Would you do anything we ask you? What is it you want me to do for you? Bartimaeus comes to him, throws off his cloak, springs up, and Jesus says to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" Bartimaeus' response is quite different from James and John. James and John want a place on the right and left in the kingdom, in his glory. The blind man said to him, "Rabbi, let me recover my sight." Well, that's an easy response there, isn't it? You remember the struggle that he had with James and John, how when they asked, "Would you do anything we ask you?" What is it that you want from me? And they said, "We want to sit one on the left, one on the right in your glory. We want to be in these significant places. Are you able?" So then Jesus goes into this really lengthy process of trying to teach them the nature of the kingdom. And with Bartimaeus, he just simply says, once Bartimaeus makes the request, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Well, I would like to be able to see." Jesus responds, "Go your way. Your faith has made you well." And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. Two stories, similar themes, because there's the same words, same question. Bartimaeus has a better understanding, though, of who Jesus is than James and John, I think. Because when James and John approach Jesus, they are thinking mostly of what the benefit will be for themselves. Bartimaeus is thinking the same thing too, isn't he? What do you want from me? Well, I need something for myself. I need you to restore my sight. I need to be able to see again. What's the difference in those two requests? One is, it's both about themselves, one from James and John and the other from Bartimaeus. What's the difference in those two requests? Still selfish requests, but what's the difference? Faith, exactly. They wanted honor and they wanted influence, power, whatever. And Bartimaeus comes not only with faith, but doesn't he come with humility and recognition, because he cries out, now listen, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And they said, "Shh, you're causing a ruckus. Just be quiet. Jesus is teaching over there. You're interrupting Jesus." What did he do? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're not going to keep me quiet. You're not going to keep me quiet. So he cried out all the more. Mm-hmm. Right. I'm not seeing. Yes. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Makes me think he'd been in the temple a bit. He's got a lot of waiting time on his hands, and he goes in the temple and sits and listens to the rabbis teach. And they're teaching about Son of David. They're teaching about this Messiah that's coming. And when this Messiah that's coming comes into his city, he cries out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Shh. You got to be quiet. Be silent. And he cried out even more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, in the English Standard, it simply says, "Call him." That's quite a powerful phrase, isn't it? He's really almost chastising those who told him to be quiet, because he is saying, let him come to me. Bring him to me. Let him come to me. He is one that I want to interact with. And they called the blind man, saying to him, take heart, get up. He is calling you. And then he says, go on your way. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. Yeah, exactly. And as Barry said, this may be his only opportunity. If I got to stand up and throw rocks, if I've got to throw dust in there, I'm going to get this guy's attention. And he did. You're not going to keep me from speaking and getting Jesus' attention. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's already been brought up, Maury brought this up, the same thing that the disciples did not comprehend was the thing that probably revealed it to him. The teaching of the Old Testament and the hearing of the miracles that he was doing, so he knew. He trusted in him. And the disciples didn't do that. And they were with him. And mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And he says, what is it you want? What did you want? Same question he asked James and John. All right, appreciate your comments.